Morning, y'all. Thanks for the waves. How's everyone? Good, thumbs up. You're welcome to unmute yourself at this point in time to exchange in conversations and words with me. That's fine.
Morning,
All right.
Meg. Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all. Okay. All right. Also, this morning we're going to go into kind of like a second half of testing. I want this class to be more of a time where you all can work on this and be able to ask questions. So the majority of this hour is going to be spent in breakout rooms with partners, and you'll be trying out an interaction pattern, writing tests, getting those tests to pass, and then coming back with any questions that you've come up with during that time. I do want to go over a bit more about just like setup in general for testing. But before jumping into warm-up and anything else, I just want to let you all know, I think it was mentioned to you already that accreditation, our visits for accreditation are happening today and tomorrow. So it's possible that like in breakout groups, you might have someone that's not part of your cohort jump into it, and just act normal. Just be yourselves, and you don't need to like do anything different than you would do on a normal day. But I say that just so that you all know that like that someone might be jumping into the call, someone might be jumping into your breakout rooms, and we're expecting that, and that's totally fine. If people start coming in and asking you questions, just answer whatever questions they ask you. But other than that, day as usual. Anyone have any questions about today, Joe?
Yeah, I was wondering what does that mean for us? Like if you get accreditation throughout um our
Yeah.
cohort, does that affect us in any way?
I'm not sure what it would look like retroactively for everyone. I do think, and we kind of talked about this recently, I do think that it wouldn't be like, if we did get accredited, I don't think it would be in effect until maybe June at the earliest. So that's I'm not entirely sure on that, and those are questions that we can ask
Cool.
probably some other people on the operations team, but I would also be curious to know that too.
Right on. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Was there another question? No, Joe, that was your hand. Okay. So for warm up, just like yesterday, I want you all to do this on your own for right now. And this is kind of reviewing what we did yesterday. So these three main bullet points here: what two directories should we have within our project directory? And then a few questions about mini test setup. And then the last one there: what two assertions have you learned and what do they test for? So I want to give you all, I'll go ahead and put a timer up here again. If I can get, kind of freezing for a second. Well, I'm not sure why that's not. I'll take a look at that. I'm going to put a timer on my phone then. And let's go ahead and do this for, let's do 2 minutes. And then I'll check in and see if anyone else needs more time. So 2 minutes on your own in your journals. Go ahead. realize I was muted. Okay. Let's go ahead in your participants tab. If you feel like you need some more time on this warm up, just kind of brainstorming questions or answers to these questions, can you just give me a yes if you feel like you need more time in your participants tab? All right. Cool. Looks like majority of people are done with this. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap up this part of the warm up. And if you haven't been able to get through all the questions, that's fine. I'm going to actually jump into, let me make this a little bigger. Pull this up. I'm going to jump into, I have like a little script with all of your names in it. Can you all see my terminal all right? Cool. Thank you for a few head nods. And I'm gonna just pull out one of your names and ask you all to answer a few questions. If you get picked, you can just say pass. You don't need to struggle through something, or if you don't know the answer to it, that's totally fine. That's totally fine if you just want to say pass, and then I'll just move on to the next person. No big deal. Okay. So s.pop. Yessie, you are my first victim. So what two directories should we have within our project directory?
So for that, the two directories we should have is the test directory and the library directory.
Cool. Test and lib folder. Nice. And then for this mini test setup, what do you have to require in a test file? Isabel? Is that, did I spell your name right?
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Can I just, I'm gonna pass right now.
Yep, no worries. How about Dominic? What do you have to require in a test file?
I'm gonna pass as well.
Okay, no worries. James?
All right, so to require in a test file, you need mini test auto run, and then you need to require the ./lib/ whatever the file name is that you're pulling the class from. Like you have one class, multiple classes, you require as many as you need.
Awesome.
That's the only stuff you want to require. I wrote out the whole test page. So.
Yeah, I think that's good. As far as like what to require at the top, you definitely want that mini test auto run. You can do the mini test pride if you want, but that's optional. And then this year, definitely you need to require any files that are necessary for what you're testing. So if you're writing a student test, then you need to make sure that you are requiring that student file that you're testing. Sometimes you might have more than one, and you might have noticed this in your project already. You might have to require more than one file if your test is involving code from different files. So you just have to make sure that you're requiring any files that are going to be tested within your test file. What's your test class inherit from? What's your test class inherit from? Sandra?
Sorry. I'm not entirely sure. I'm like guessing like your test class is inheriting from that file that you're linking, but I'm not sure of the question.
No, that's totally fine. And this is kind of like a new word that we haven't really talked about before. When we talk about inheriting, it's shown with that like little chevron next to the class name. So, and Sandra, can you see that after the chevron? What comes after the chevron when you say like student test, chevron, what comes after that?
Like the mini test, colon, test.
Yep, you got it. So mini test. Oops. So this is inheriting from that mini test library, and then mini test gem, and specifically this, we call it like a test module where all of those assertions live. Gotcha. And we'll talk more about inheritance and modules later on this mod, but that all of our tests, when we're writing our mini test, which is in mod 1, we'll be using mini test. In mod 2, you'll be using other testing frameworks, but in mod 1, we're using mini test. So all the tests that we write in mod 1 are going to inherit from mini test.
Cool.
Thanks, Andrea. Syntax for mini test. What's the best name for a test? I'll do this one here. So best name for a test is whatever the class's name is, just followed by the word test. So class name followed by test. So student, if you're testing a student class, the name of your test would be student test. If you're testing a person class, the name of your test would be person test. And then, oops. Name the 2 assertion methods you learned yesterday and describe what they test for. So let's go ahead and whoever I call on, if you want to give me just one, that works, or if you have 2, that's fine too. So Grayson C. I think Gus, I have you in here as Gus.
Yeah. Oh.
Is that?
So
Oh, you are C.
yes.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I guess I don't. Gus, we'll go with you.
No, that's fine. So assert instance of, and that tests like if, I mean, we've used it to test if something exists, but it's basically testing like, is this thing that I've created an instance of a class? And I do have the other one if you want.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Thanks, Gus.
And then assert equal, and then that tests if an expected value is equal to the value we create.
I like that value we create. Awesome. Yeah, so those are the 2 that we've done so far. Assert instance of, testing to make sure that an object is an instance of a class, and assert equal, test if an expected value is equal to the value we create. And I think we can kind of take a look at that just to put a little bit more meaning to that wording. So this right here, assert equal, we're saying like, okay, this is the value that we're creating, student.name, or we're calling on that student object or student variable, calling this method name on it, and we're expecting to get that string of Penelope returned to us. So this is what we wrote, this is actually what we're writing, and then what we're expecting is over here on the left. Awesome. Any questions about kind of this review from yesterday? There, if you all look at, you're welcome to kind of go into GitHub and take a look at the mini test, the gem, and see and look into that test module and take a look at all of the code that's there for the assertions that we're using, the assert equal, the assert instance of. And if you do that, you'll also see a lot of other assertions. Those were 2 that we went over yesterday, assert instance of and assert equal. There are a ton more that you could use. And it's not just limited by these extra 4 that I wrote on this page that you're looking at right now, this assert nil, refute equal. There's a lot more. You can also Google, I think one thing that I've done before is I've Googled like mini test cheat sheet, and you'll have like a bunch of assertions pop up of like, these are available for you to use. To be completely honest, I haven't used the majority of them because I feel like I can get most of my testing done with that assert equal, as well as these here that are on this page that you can see. So just kind of like going through these 4, I just want to kind of like go through some common ones that you'll see and just give it a name as to like when you can use it. So for this assert actually takes 1 argument and checks to make sure it evaluates to true. So in the example from yesterday, when we kind of finished the class yesterday and I sent you all off and I was like, oh, you can go ahead and do this practice if you want. I put I forgot to mention this at the beginning of class. I tagged you all in it. So you might have seen it, you may not have. But in the thread to that practice that I put in your 2010 backend channel, I put some solutions that you could have done for the test from the practice that I sent out yesterday. So you're welcome to take a look back at that. But what it essentially was this right here. And here's an example that I kind of wrote. Let me actually get rid of these 2. There we go. So for the adult, if I wanted to say like, hey, is person 1 an adult? And I want it to return either true or false to me, I could have used, and I put this in a comment in the code that I sent you, I could have used something like assert person2 dot adults. And so I'm checking that whatever follows that word assert, that method assert, that this evaluates to true. Similarly with the refute, person1 dot adult, for this one, if I wanted to say like, oh, person 1 right here has an age of 3, and I'm checking to see if person 1's adult. And so I am like, the method that I'm using here is refute. So checking to see that whatever follows this method refute evaluates to false. So 2 different ones that you could use. Those are helpful for when you're looking for something to be true or false. So let me go ahead and put this one here as well. Takes 1 argument as well. Takes 1 argument. Checks to make sure it evaluates to false. I'm going to also put this in here, or nil. Something to kind of be careful of here. So refute will check to see if something is false or nil. False and nil in Ruby are falsy. Everything else that's not false or nil is truthy. We'll get into this like Boolean logic, I think at the end of this week or into next week. I believe Kat has a lesson on that. So we'll get into that idea of like falsy or truthy, but refute is checking to make sure that it's either false or nil. Assert just makes sure that it's true. Assert nil also takes 1 argument. Checks to make sure it evaluates to nil, or that it's empty to start out. And then refute equal. This one takes two arguments. And you can kind of imagine we're using assert equal. We've already used that one. And we're checking to make sure that those 2 arguments that we pass are equal to each other. But with refute equal, we're making sure that those 2 arguments that we're passing it are not equal. Any questions on these 4 new assertions? I think I hear someone talking, but oh, there you go. Sydney. Sorry, I don't know if Sydney, you were talking.
Oh, sorry, I thought I put my hand down because I was going to ask about refute and being truthy. Because sometimes when I'll change it from like assert equal false to refute, and then I'll get an error that it's truthy. So I'm not sure why I'm getting that.
Yeah.
But
I tend to actually, this is one that I see a lot of people use. I tend to not use refute for that reason of if, let's say in this code here, let's say for some reason this didn't work and it returned nil, but I'm really expecting it to be false, then I would get like a falsely passing test. And so I almost rather, when I'm checking that something's false, I almost rather do it with assert equal, since refute is only looking for if something is false or nil.
okay. I do that too, because every time I change it, I'm like, okay, it's wrong. Okay.
Yeah, this is one that you'll commonly see, but it's just something to be aware of, that there could be some like falsely passing tests if something were to return nil instead of false, since refute is really just looking for either nil or false.
Okay. Thank you.
Question. Yeah. Sam?
For just the assert case or the assert method, there I think is an optional second argument that I ran into during the Ruby exercise for like cupcakes RB or something. It was pretty confusing as to like the reason or why to even use that second argument. It seems like it's just a comment.
I actually have never used it with a second argument, because I've always just used it with that argument, the only argument that I pass it. I'm checking to see if that evaluates to true. If you want to, can you find that, Sam? And I don't think, let me actually put in our code help channel. I don't think I put, oh, Mike put a testing thread in there. So if you could find that and put that in the testing thread, we can take a look at that too. Thanks. Gus?
Yeah, so I'm looking, and I've seen this in other places, but like on the example you have on the screen right now, that you have assert equal false and assert equal true. Like, what's the difference between doing assert equal true and just assert? Like, what's the benefits of one or the other?
Yeah, it doesn't matter with that. It's just a little bit of an easier way to write it. And you'll notice that a lot of times some of these methods will do the same thing, but it's just a nicer, easier way to write it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. James?
Yeah, I'm just curious, does Minitest have a feature or function that allows you to print out the test results? So if you did refute it would show you that it refuted nil or false.
Oh, I see what you're saying. To like show what it evaluated to.
Yeah.
Not that I know of. I would say if you really wanted something to evaluate to nil, then use assert nil.
Okay.
Yeah. Or
Thank
if like it didn't matter if it was false or nil, then use refute.
Okay.
But yeah, not that I know of. I don't believe that there is anything that will print out those results like that. All right. Any other questions from anyone? Go back to this. Yessie?
Yeah, I had a question about the refute equal. When would be a time we would use that?
I think kind of like off the top of my head, I could think of maybe you had some type of command that you were testing that changed a value, like a old pre-existing value, and you wanted to check that after you did that, you ran that command, that the old value wasn't there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think the more you get into the functionality, the more you'll come up with reasons to use these assertions. I think a lot of times though, you can get around most assertions with that assert equal. But these are available amongst many others, and you can take a look into more if you'd like. All right. Yesterday, and I just want to kind of run through this. I think this part will be kind of quick. Yesterday, I mentioned in part of the class that we work with two different types of methods. It can either be a query method or command method. And the example that I gave before, and we can kind of take a look at this first. So I guess give us information about an object when we're using a method and we want to get something back. That's kind of like asking a question and getting an answer. So those are our query methods. And so I would say a lot of your methods are going to be query methods. But the other type of questions or methods that we have are these command methods that their purpose is to change something about that object that you're calling it on, or just change something about an object. So we only had one example in yesterday's class of a command method. The command method in this case was that add cookie. We were changing something about the student object. We were changing, I guess this is like a funny example. Students are bringing cookies to class or something. But we were changing the collection of cookies that the students have within their state that they're holding. So cookies, I would say, is a query method. We're saying like, student, what cookies do you have in your collection? Or name, we're saying, student, what's your name? And we're getting something back right away. Whereas this add cookie, what we're really looking for is for it to change what we get back when we call .cookies, change that cookie collection. The other thing that I'll say, in any type of testing that you're doing, whether it's mini test, RSpec, whatever it might be, there's always these 4 parts of a test that you could have. And so we use this acronym SEAT for setup, execution, assertion, and teardown. And taking a look at some of these that let me actually go to the one that we did yesterday together. All right, let's get rid of some of these just to make it a little cleaner. All right, so setup, when we talk about the setup of a test, it's any type of objects that you needed to create in order to eventually make your assertions. So in the case of, let's take a look at just this one, test it has a name. In the case of testing it has a name, in order to actually get to our assertion eventually, we had to create a student object. So that's your setup there. Execution, I would actually say that this like student.name, that's part of your execution. We had to run that code in order to make an assertion. I could have done something like this and said like actual equals student.name and expected equals Penelope, and then put this on that line of like, here's actual and here's my expected. But the actual execution that we're doing here is a student.name. There doesn't always need to be execution like this one up here. There's really nothing that we're doing to student. We're just checking to make sure that it is of a student, the student class. But in this case, we're running some type of code, that's our execution. And then your assertion down here is that assert part of your SEAT, that acronym. And then we can take a look at this one here. Tester can add cookies. So setup, we need a student in order to test that we can add cookies. So students are set up. Part of our execution in this case is this line 27 and 28, right? Like we need to add those cookies in order to make the assertion that the cookies got added the way that we wanted them to. And then the last part of that acronym was this T, teardown. This is, depending on the testing framework that you're using, it's usually not something that you need to worry about. But you can see kind of like with each of these tests, you're creating objects. And then after your test is done, those objects are gone. So there's this like internal teardown that happens to get rid of the objects that you create with each test. So teardown, I would say this is not something that you really need to worry about, but it is part of a test and it happens without you needing to do anything. In Mod 1, we will mainly be working with unit tests and integration tests. So when we talk about unit tests, we're talking about like the tests within one class. And if we're talking about integration tests, just like the word sounds, integration, we're talking about tests that are testing interdependencies. I think one example that I could give for that could be like in your current project, there's a method, and it's okay if you're not there yet, but there's a method that you call in the round called take turn, and that returns a turn object. So it's like there's this like integration happening of like calling it on round, and somehow there needs to be a turn object returned to you, and it's jumping to another class. It's like grabbing from another class and returning something else. So as soon as more than one class is involved and there's calls made to other classes, that's what we would consider to be an integration test. And we'll come back to this like wording of integration test, unit test, as we go through your time in Mod 1 and beyond. But these are the two main types of tests that we'll be doing in Mod 1. When you get into Mod 2, you'll talk more about feature tests and acceptance tests, but I just put them up there so that you can hear them and it's not totally unfamiliar when you get to Mod 2. All right. I want to open it up for questions before we'll take a break, and then I'm going to put you all into breakout groups for mainly the rest of the class. But are there any questions before we do take that break? B?
Do you mind just repeating the difference between the command and the query test?
Yes, yeah. So command versus query. A query method is a method that you're expecting to get something back from. So a method that you call in order to get information back. Whereas a command method is a method that you're going to call to change something about an object.
Thank you.
Yeah. Joe?
I'm not sure about this. I could have been dreaming when I saw this, but I think I remember seeing right after the class test, inherit mini test, the first method is define setup. How does that work? We'll
get into some other like better test practices. I think we have a testing best practices. I think that's like literally what it's called, lesson, testing best practices. And so we'll talk about that. The setup is mainly to dry up your test so that you don't have to write the same code in all of them. For example, like in my student test right now, I'm creating the same student object in every single one. So when you start seeing that repetition and you're like, oh, I do the same line of code in every single one of my methods, you can pull it into a setup method so that it is consolidated just to one spot in your test. And the setup method will run before every single one of your tests. So it's kind of like a nice place to put objects or commands that would happen for all of your tests. But I would say don't worry about that quite yet. I'd rather you just focus on like writing individual tests and not so much about like drying up. When I say dry up your code, dry stands for don't repeat yourself, which is eventually something that we want you all to really implement in your code, not repeating yourself too much. And so setup is a great way to dry your code, but I would say it's not important that you all do that right now. You're welcome to look into it more if you want to though. Gus?
Just a quick convention question. So it looks like on the example, like you have your method name and then you have your setup and then you've got a blank line before you do your assert statement. Is that like kind of the standard convention or?
Yeah, this is how I see, yeah, this would be a convention for this of just like getting all of your setup done. A lot of times there might be like more objects that you need to create. So I like to get all of my setup in one spot, execution in another, and then assertion at the end.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, great question. All right, let's go ahead. Let's take a 5-minute break. I'll go ahead and put a timer up here. There it is. We'll do 5 minute, 19 seconds. And when we come back, we'll go ahead and get into breakout groups and try some testing out in those as well. See y'all soon. Okay. Awesome.
That
So
worked.
cool. We are wrapping up our time here. And some of you may have noticed I dropped a possible solution to, or like a way to write this test in the 2010 backend channel. So if you take a look at where I dropped the interaction pattern, I have 2 replies on that post. And so I put one example of a student test and one example of a student class that you could have used to get that test to pass. And so instead of kind of like going through this, and I have my examples up here, I want to open it up for any like follow-up questions that you all might have from just trying this out on your own or within your groups. You can raise your hand. Adam?
Yeah, I saw in your student.rb, you put, and I know we covered this a bit yesterday, so if anyone in the group knows the answer, you put to promote add mod plus equals 1. Just wondering, what's the benefit of doing that rather than just a plus or at mod equals mod plus 1? Is it just a shorter version?
Yeah, so you could either do it that at mod plus 1 or at mod equals at mod plus 1, or the way that I had it before, at mod plus equal 1. So these two are identical. This is saying like take at mod and set it equal to what at mod was plus 1. And this is doing the same exact thing. It's a little bit more shorthand. It's just saying like add 1 and reassign it to that new value. But if you just had that like plus 1, it wouldn't hold that in state. So you want to reassign it. So either line 15 or line 16 would work. Love the background. V?
I was wondering, why can't you call the method that you called learn? Yep. If you call that method skills, it will throw an error. Is that because we have another method called skills?
If you called, say that again.
The method that you have that is named learn, I had it named skills, and then it throws an error. Is it because I already have one?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. It's probably looking, it's going to look here first, since that's your outer reader. And it sounds like you have kind of like two methods named the same thing, so it doesn't know which one to go to.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes. Any others? Sydney?
So in your method, when you said at mod equals mod, was it returning to you a string or the integer that's being passed as an argument?
I actually changed, when I sent that to you all, I changed it briefly after. So if you copied it, I had it student.mod returning a string of 1, but then I was like, no, I want that to be an integer. So I changed that.
Okay. I was just wondering, I was like, wait, that was like, okay, because I string interpolated mine to make it come back as a string.
Yes, yeah, or else you could have just done it here and said like 2s if you wanted to do it.
Okay, cool.
In initialize too. That's fine to format it like that there.
Perfect.
Yeah. Awesome, y'all. All right. That kind of wraps up this for today, second half of testing. We'll be getting more and more in every lesson that we do. We'll get into more testing examples. And so as we go through those, feel free to ask more testing questions. And as always in the parking lot, if you have any follow-up questions or just have anything that comes up later on, feel free to put it in that thread and we can go back and answer it whenever those questions pop up. So let's go ahead, let's do a 5-minute break, and then Kat's going to go through next lesson, so I'm going to hand over host to Kat. And Kat, is that all right with you? Start at 10:05?
Yep, perfect.
Cool. See y'all then.